Hello, everyone. This is Charles Peterson, one of your co-hosts for the Hotel Bar Sessions, and you are listening to our Hotel Bar Sessions Afterthoughts. The thoughts that we have, the l'esprit d'escalier, right? The thoughts in the stairwell of our episodes. These are the things that we wish we had said, but we didn't get a chance to say. I'm here sitting here with one of my co-hosts, Lee Johnson. How you doing, Lee?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm glad to be here without the glasses.
There you go. That we can see those gorgeous, shining bionic eyes. Is that a glint of metal that I see in your cornea? And I'm also sitting here with my man, Dr. Richard Lee. Rick, what's going on?
How you doing, Charles? I'm all right.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Are we getting drinks for this, or are we going to do this one straight?
I think we came with our drinks.
Oh, there we go.
Right.
This is the BYOB session.
We got to give Frangelica a day off sometime.
Yeah. And we're recording on a Sunday, so in a blue law state, that would be wrong. All right, let's get cracking. We're going to talk about episode 22, which was our focus on the white working class, and Rick Lee was in the hot seat for that one. Lee, any sort of woulda, coulda, shouldas with that one? Things you wish you'd have said?
I can't tell if you were asking me or if you were asking Rick, because you said
Rick.
Lee.
I'm sorry, I thought I said, I'm looking at Lee's name, his last name. You two, this actually have been fucking with me the whole season.
Actually, it turns out, Charles, my last name isn't Lee and Lee's first name isn't Lee. What a horrible ass Twilight Zone fuckery is this?
This is all just some psychological experiment to see if you will be peer pressured into changing some part of your name to Lee. Charles Lee. Peterson Lee. I could turn myself into an adverb. I'm more than happy to do that. But Rick Lee, since you were in the hot seat for episode 22, what are your regrets?
Well, first, before regrets, let me just say that there have been a number of episodes this season, and I hope there are more and more of these, where I came in both with an idea of where we were going to go with it and a position I had on our topic. And the conversation taught me some things, and I came away with a different idea, and it went in a different direction. So this is why I love doing this with both of you. Learning is really fun, and I love learning, and I learn a lot on this podcast. The one thing, because of the direction we went in, one of the questions I wanted to raise was politically, for all of us in the United States to go forward, do we, or does the left, have to somehow address the grievances of the white working class, even while we think they might be bullshit? Yeah. And so I wanted to talk. I wish we had some time to talk a little bit more about that.
That's interesting, because I was going to say, Rick, that's one of the things I noticed when listening to it back, was that was the question that you sort of asked us right at the top of the episode, and none of us really straightforwardly answered that. So I want to ask you straightforwardly now, like, do you think these are bullshit complaints?
So I think that the complaints are real complaints. That is, they express a feeling, and I think that feeling has to be acknowledged as real. The content of the complaint, I think, is complete and utter bullshit. but I think that somehow that there is hurt, that there is suffering, that there is a struggle, I think in one way or another has to be acknowledged, not what the content of that is.
And by content, do you mean sort of the explanation?
Yeah. So like the reason why I'm struggling to get a job is because Mexicans are coming over the border.
Right.
Like I don't need to, in fact, if we go back to the laughter episode, I don't think saying that that's false helps anything. But I think somehow there is an experience of pain that probably should be addressed in some way or another.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's interesting because I agree that the left has to engage right? These complaints, these concerns, and I don't want to call them complaints. I think they're very real concerns, right? It's just not completely imaginary. I do think the explanatory source is problematic, but I think the left definitely needs to engage this, because to be honest, I think for far too long the left has sort of, I don't want to say enabled, but certainly sort of turned the blind eye to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And instead of confronting it, right, to begin to dispel, right, this false explanatory source, right, the xenophobia, the racism, the left has just simply made excuses for it. And I think that has to stop, but it has to be engaged. It's just the way in which you engage it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that maybe one of the things that I wish we had talked more about in the white working class episode was, given the kind of picture of the white working class that we were dealing with, I wish we had talked more about the absolute fusion of politics and religion that helped to form that class.
Right.
And I think, just kind of following off of what Charles was just saying, I think that might have forced us to reckon with the blind eye that the white church, especially the white evangelical church, has turned to racism, and has really used racism as a tool, but sort of under the guise of economic concerns and under the guise of national concerns and community concerns. So yeah, I wish we had talked more about like how important religion is to this particular iteration of the white working class that we were talking about.
Yeah.
There are 2 points, and I do completely agree with Lee about how we don't. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. How we don't engage that. And it makes me think about a great essay by Manning Marable, the great scholar out of Columbia University, passed away a few years ago. And he has this great essay, the name of which escapes me, where he talks about how white supremacy is injected at the foundation of American Protestantism, right, in the colonial period. And that really Christianity just becomes sort of something that gets attached to the true religion, which is this sort of white nationalist, white supremacist, right? So, I think we like to think about this in terms of a more recent moment in American history, American church history, and it's not, right? The Ku Klux Klan were a heavily pro-Christian sort of organization, right? Christianity becomes a means by which to justify and explain away, Black humanity, right, during the period of slavery. So Lee is right. We should have engaged that, right? Because it's the feeder system in many ways.
Right.
And it's the greatest it's the greatest example of moral hypocrisy and cowardice.
Yeah.
Certain parts of the Christian church allow to happen in its name.
And it's interesting, Charles, because well, first of all, the Klan is Christian unless you happen to be a dirty Catholic.
Right. Right.
But also that early on, some of the earliest white abolitionists were coming out of the Unitarian movement. And we just had a guest appearance in case you're listening and not watching.
Must be a glitch in the Matrix. Matrix 4 Resurrections. Call us.
That's my cat champion. She's our mascot.
Yeah. And when she does that, it means what I was saying was utter bullshit. She's like, I'm going to show you my butt.
I'm going to call cat shit on that, Rick.
But my point was that the Unitarian movement gave birth to a lot of abolitionist movements.
Right.
And that is, okay, in a way Christian, but it's certainly not, any kind of mainline or Orthodox Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
What I wish we had talked about, and I really began to regret that we did not have that conversation after we were engaged by someone. Was that Twitter or was that Facebook? There's a Facebook thread about the episode where there's some people who were asking questions about how we're defining white working class and that sort of thing. But I regret not bringing up was the fact, and this is me trying to in the future not paint with so broad a brush, the fact that there is a history of radical white sort of workers
Sure.
who have pushed back against the white nationalist, white supremacist, right, focus of a lot of their workers, their family members, so forth and so on. And once again, Du Bois is going to get a lot more work in this episode. But for me, Du Bois, after coining the idea and the term wages of whiteness and recognizing, white consciousness as a part of the working class, white working class sort of experience, in 1919 writes, I think, a brilliant biography of John Brown, where he posits John Brown as this sort of archetype of a radical white working class, right, activist. And between Du Bois and between the great sort of history Black abolitionist by Benjamin Quarles, John Brown is squarely immersed in the Black abolitionist community of his time, right? And looked to Black leadership for his cues, right, for his way of thinking about these problems. And I always say to my students, why is it that James Brown, why is it that John Brown is constructed as being insane, right? And they're like, I don't know. And they're like, because he was willing to give his life for Black freedom. In the context of white nationalist America, the only white man that does that is a crazy white man, right? If you think Black humanity is so dear that you would sacrifice your life and your children's life, like his sons went with him to Harper's Ferry. So I regret the fact that we didn't talk about and give more instances of the ways in which sort of the white working class has come together in solidarity, has fought, right, in support of anti-racist, anti-white nationalist sort of causes, and not just here in the United States, but we can talk about sort of the white working class or members of the white sort of working class within South Africa that were part of the anti-apartheid movement and so forth and so on. So I regret we did not give enough time and attention to that aspect of white consciousness.
Can I just say one more thing about this episode before we move on? But I also think that one of the things that we didn't talk about was how the white working class, whether you're talking about the conservative white working class or the progressive white working class in America, has no working class leadership. So the leadership of the white working class, both in the progressive side and in the conservative side, are millionaires, right? And I'm thinking back to early 20th century and before, where the leaders of the white working class were themselves working class people. Right. Now, even if you look at somebody like Bernie Sanders, I mean, there was a time in his life that he was a working class person, but most of his life, right, he's been a congressman and a wealthy one at that. And of course, on the conservative side, the white working class is represented by, podcasters and media figures and et cetera, that are all, making money hand over fist. So this idea of working class leadership not being a part of the working class, I think, is really important too.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So let's move on to episode 23, to superheroes. And that's right. That's right. And I believe I was in the hot seat for that episode. Lee Johnson, not Rick Lee.
Yes.
I'm looking at you, Lee Johnson.
Yes.
Woulda, coulda, shoulda.
First of all, I want to say that I really learned a lot in this episode. I don't think that I took this superhero figure seriously enough before this. And actually, since this episode, I've seen on the, pandemic pedagogy and the teaching philosophy groups online that a lot of people are interested in using superheroes as a sort of theme for their classes. So I think this is a really great topic. I don't think that there's anything that I wish I would have said. I mean, I feel like I learned so much from the episode that, there's not much that I want to add to it. I would have maybe liked to, I wish we could have spent a little bit more time between parsing out the differences between the two figures that we talked about right at the very beginning, which were Alan Moore and who was the other one?
Grant Morrison.
And Grant Morrison. Yeah. I thought that was a really fascinating discussion. And I just would have liked to have learned more. But what about you, Rick?
Well, I agree with that second point that you just made, Lee. I also, wished that we got to the point where we were sort of sure that superheroes have to have some kind of dark background, or something dark in their origin story. And I think that's in fact the case. But then that becomes interesting. Like, could someone be a superhero without that dark origin? And I think that would be an interesting. I would have liked to have talked a little bit more about that.
Sure, and there are characters who don't have some sort of tragic emotional wound that drives them to become superheroes. There are characters who just are like, I have the capability. I think it's a good thing for me to use these powers or abilities to fight for justice and equality. Right.
So, Charles, on that note, do you know anything about, for example, Peter Parker's origin story? Like, as much as I know about Spider-Man, he was bit by a spider and then became Spider-Man. But and then in the movies and so on, they give him a dark adolescence, like he's awkward and a weakling, kind of nerdy. But is that part of the original origin of Spider-Man?
Yeah, what made Spider-Man so very popular, I think, and such an icon for readers, really from the beginning of his appearance with Marvel Comics, was the fact that he was a teenager. And he was a teenager that had the same sort of problems that the teenagers who were reading the stories had. He didn't turn in homework on time, or his parents or his Aunt May was upset with him because he didn't do chores, or he was broke and didn't have money, or the girl that he really liked didn't like him back, right? So he had the same sort of real world problems. He was a very human sort of character versus, Superman, who's like an alien, or,
right.
Aquaman, who's like from Atlantis or whatever. Right? So, and he lived in a real world. I mean, that's probably the brilliance of Marvel Comics, is that they put all their characters, right, in real world situations. So Spider-Man's from Queens.
Right.
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 Yeah. He's a 15-year-old kid from Queens in 1963, 1964, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
But there is, and I'll forget, but there is a dark part, and what you see in the movies is true. Right. He gains the powers and decides to completely exploit them for financial gain, and does not commit himself to seeking justice and truth and helping out the little guy. And because of his selfishness, his uncle is murdered by a robber that he refused to capture because he's like, well, this is my problem. That's what the cops are for. And so, this moral lesson that he's taught, right, that with great power comes great responsibility, is based on the fact that he didn't use his powers for good, and someone very close to him, right, suffered for his selfishness.
So you can't be a superhero and have a side hustle.
Well, the side hustle was first, and then superhero right came later.
Right. So, Charles, you were in the hot seat. Is there anything you wish we had talked about or you had said?
Yeah, we went into this, making the comparison between Alan Moore and Grant Morrison. I mean, I think it's a really fascinating sort of debate if we establish it that way between the two writers. But what I regret not doing was spending more time talking about sort of the various forms of representation that superheroes have had, whether it be in terms of questions of sexual identity, or whether it be in terms of gender, or whether in terms of race. And there have been sort of these meager efforts in the past to create, certainly, starting in the late 60s, early 70s, to create characters that sort of are better representations of peoples of color, right? Because the early comic books industry, very racist. Representations of Asian Americans, representations of African Americans, and just horribly racist, embarrassingly so now. But what we've seen, I'd say in the last 20 to 25 years, is first you've got more people of color and more women, right, and more LGBTQ writers coming into these companies, and they're beginning to write characters who represent some very real sort of circumstances and conditions and perspectives, right, from those identity bases. And so I think what makes them important is that these are models for young people, right? LGBTQ youth, or young women, or sort of young Black people, or young Latinos, right? The young Asian Americans, right? If you look at the recent Shang-Chi sort of Marvel film. And these are important Marvel, figures, I think, because they show these populations that they too can be empowered, right? That who they are and the circumstances of their lives are gaining attention and respect and affirmation within the popular sphere. So I didn't talk about that more. And I think that's a really huge and important piece of it, because, that attracted me to the X-Men as a young reader. But I'd never seen a Black female character in any sort of medium outside of maybe television who was so empowered as the character of Storm, right? Who was a leader, who gained respect from her colleagues, who could command a situation. So I think that's an important part of it. And I understand Moore's concern about how relying upon the superhero figure can lead to the infantilization of a society. But at the same time, there are people who really draw a lot of affirmation, right, and self-regard from these characters right now.
And inspiration.
And inspiration, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The new Ms. Marvel is a Muslim American woman.
Nice.
And that's in a post 9/11 world, that's got to be an amazing sort of feeling for Muslim children who read these comics.
Yeah.
All right. I didn't mean to close it down like that.
Rick and I are just like defaulting to your expertise on superheroes.
Right.
We sort of agreed we were going to do that before the episode, and just are continuing to do that anytime.
Right. End scene. All right. So let's move on to episode 24, specialization. I do believe Dr. Rick Lee was riding the hot seat for that one. Rick, any ideas, any thoughts that you have? Anything else you feel like you should have said in that moment?
Well, first of all, I should apologize to our listener, if there is one out there, that somehow we got out of sync, and so I was in the hot seat like in 2 out of these 3 episodes. But we're going to take care of that, and I'm out of the rotation now. But there's not something I wish I would have said or we would have talked about more, except that it's sort of to put together something that I think Lee came to in the middle or toward the end, and something Charles started out with, namely that we all seem to celebrate what we were calling, in a positive way, dilettantism, a sort of inter or multidisciplinarity. But then Lee was right, I think, to point out that the job market sort of mitigates against that kind of multidisciplinarity. But I think so too does the need to get tenure, for example, and there's not a lot of what I normally call an academic infrastructure. So societies and conferences and so on that would allow for multidisciplinarity or interdisciplinarity, except in fields like coming out of philosophy. I mentioned this in the episode. I think feminist theory does a lot of good interdisciplinary work, and I think it's necessarily interdisciplinary. I think Africana studies is necessarily multidisciplinary. But if you're I don't know, a Hegel scholar, it's not that usual that you're talking with art historians or economic historians, or to get a better picture of what's going on.
Or if you're a Hegel scholar, or even actual historians.
I think that's amazingly the fact that you use Hegel as an example, and Hegel is considered one of the most encyclopedic sort of philosophical minds in the history of Western philosophy, and people can't think about, shouldn't a Hegel scholar be inherently interdisciplinary? I mean, considering the range of things Hegel thought that he knew about.
Yeah. And following up from that, I would like to point out that I think our world in so many ways has become, or we've come to see, the immense complexity of it. And I think it's no longer possible for us to be a Kant or a Leibniz or a Descartes, because I can't master contemporary mathematics. It's just too well, I mean, shit, I don't even know what happens when I turn the light switch on. I don't get how like that goes on. Like they seem connected in some way, but like I don't know.
If it's any comfort, Leibniz was not an electrical engineer. If it's any comfort.
No, but I mean, the dude invented the calculus, and then he has a plan for the invasion of Egypt, and he illuminated Vienna. And his plan to illuminate Vienna is still currently in existence. So like that, no one's calling on me to figure out, how to get the L service in Chicago to work better.
Well said. Well said. I think specialization, I really appreciated this, and I wanted to thank you for bringing this up, because this is certainly probably one of the issues that has been a challenge to me in my career. And I've had to sort of navigate and work around it, or really understand how I feel about not feeling like I'm a specialist in any sort of way, and that sort of I sort of, pick and choose, dib and dab, sort of dilettantism, as we're calling it. So I appreciated this. It actually made me appreciate those who could go sort of, if narrow, but yet still deep, right? And get a sense of how that still has benefit in many ways to various disciplines. So, I don't really have much to add to it. I think it was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Lee?
Yeah, so I am going to, I think for the first time, actually use my time in this Afterthoughts to do what I think Afterthoughts was originally designed to do, which is like clarify something that I said that when I said, okay, so first of all, I said what I meant. I said what I said, and I said what I meant. However, when I listened to it back, I was like, oh, that could really easily be misheard. So I just want to point to something that I think I was getting to near the end of this episode. So I was trying to point out that it can sometimes feel like a disadvantage when you're in a underrepresented group in a discipline. I use myself as an example. When you're a woman in a discipline, you can sometimes feel as if you're boxed in to specializing in an area in that discipline that is representative of your demographic group. And I said, I resisted making, feminism or feminist theory one of my specializations because, I was doing a lot of other things and I didn't want to get boxed into that. And I also said that I was a little bit concerned that when people made job ads and they said, they advertised for someone who does feminist philosophy or someone who does African-American philosophy or someone who does Asian philosophy or LGBTQ philosophy, that what they really wanted was a woman, a Black person, an Asian person, or a queer person. And, and so that was like the way to do it. I want to just and I thought that was problematic. One, because it doesn't encourage people from dominant groups to specialize in those things. And also because, again, I feel like it kind of hems in people from underrepresented groups. I just want to be 100% clear that I do think it is important to increase diversity in hiring, both in terms of areas of specialization and in terms of the actual demographics of the faculty. So I was not trying, I feel like when I listened to it back, that what it sounded like I was saying was, look, not all women want to do feminist philosophy. Not all Black people want to do African-American philosophy. And there are a lot of white people who can do it too. Like we should just hire them, and that is 100% not what I was trying to say. I don't know. I'm not sure that I'm actually making it any better right now, but that's my afterthought.
No, I think you are. And I think that, to go back to Charles' point in relation to the superheroes, to see Storm, I think there is something incredibly powerful for our undergraduates to see, a woman of color who's just really into Leibniz, right?
Yes.
And then students can then see, oh, I could also be really into Leibniz if I want to. And so I think there's a genuine power there. And I think for the reasons why we want to diversify all of our faculties, for those same reasons, we should diversify every field within our departments.
Agreed.
Yeah, because my worry is that it's very easy to, in trying to correct the problem, to sort of reduplicate the conditions that cause that problem to arise in the first place.
Right.
And I think that, an example of that, just kind of following on what Rick says, is that if you've only ever taken feminist philosophy from women professors, you've only ever taken African philosophy or African American studies from Black professors, or Asian philosophy from, or LGBTQ philosophy from queer professors, that's good. I'm glad that we have that representation. I'm glad that we have that diversification, both in terms of fields and in terms of faculty, but that's just recreating the same conditions, right? Which is to sort of make these marginal, afterthoughts to the curriculum, and not to integrate them into the curriculum as essential parts of understanding the discipline as a whole. So
I remember a headline from The Onion from years ago. Chinese student at Hong Kong University just really into Hume.
Well, I mean, right? It's great. I mean, I'm not really into Hume, but okay. Yeah.
I kind of am. I love that. I love his skepticism. It's amazing to me.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
but the article then went on to, like, a white dude in the United States gets suddenly into Buddhism. So the article was written just like that.
Yeah.
And his parents are really angry at him for.
But I think that another thing too is that we have to think about the way that this plays out in, regular day-to-day academic life, like how we network and how we interact with one another. And I will tell you, if you work in feminist philosophy and you go to feminist philosophy conferences, it is mostly women. Right. And that is not good. I mean, that's not good if the networking capabilities of people who work in these specializations are so limited and non-diverse.
I mean, it seems I have two sort of questions about that. Not question, but sort of thoughts. And certainly, I know what drew me to Africana studies is because I had this set of questions about the experiences, right, of peoples of African descent. And, most of my colleagues who are of African descent in Africana studies were drawn in the same sort of way. So, I think that that's a legitimate sort of way of understanding why you may have representation of a certain demographic in these fields. But these are people who, right, have a really earnest and engaged concern and set of questions, right, about the condition. I think the other side certainly is that people get ghettoized, right? And I think that's the term we were searching for, that people do sort of get ghettoized in really sort of terrifying ways. But there's also the fear that those who may not have that same demographic sort of connection to the field, right, when they teach or they write, they do it in such problematic ways, is there may be sort of, phenomenological sort of aspects of the experience they just don't get. And I've seen this. I've seen males who taught feminist, right, philosophy and did it in aggressively anti-feminist ways. Right? So I hear what you're saying, and I do agree, but I think, what has to be taken very seriously are the reasons why we seem to have, right, these levels of representation from groups that are directly connected to these fields of study.
But serious question. I mean, I've also taken classes from Hegel scholars who were terrible Hegel scholars, right? And I don't think, to myself, if only they lived their life more like Hegel, they would be a better Hegel scholar. And I agree with you. I mean, as a woman and as a queer person, I agree with you that there are certain lived experiences and phenomenological insights that people have that contribute to these specializations in really important ways, and often, although not always, contribute to the pedagogy, right, as well. But I do worry about, I don't have a solution to the problem. I do worry, though, about the kind of identification of the demographic and the specialization.
And I'm not arguing for essentialism at all.
Yeah.
That just because you're a Black person, you can explain ancient Kush without even thinking about it. That's bullshit. I don't agree with that at all. And I've seen Africana studies courses taught by African descended people that were terrible. No question. But being terrible in your field or in your research area is different from, teaching feminist philosophy and being misogynist, right? Or teaching Africana studies and being sort of a quiet sort of racist. I think those are two.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's a good way to say it. Fair point. Yeah.
So those are two different sort of things. I mean, unfortunately, you can be bad in your teaching and your field. I accept that, but you can't be someone whose fundamental way of viewing the world is antagonistic to what the scholars and writers in this field are trying to do.
Yeah, because if you're a racist, right, don't teach African philosophy or Africana studies. Go teach Kant and Hegel.
Fit in where you fit in.
Get with your people. Teamwork makes the dream work. All right, you guys. Well, this has been really great. I'm sorry, go ahead. You're the host here.
Yeah, I was gonna wrap it up.
Go ahead.
Wrap it up. This has been fantastic. I love these sessions. It's an extension of our conversations, but it also makes me think, oh my God, this is another topic for a hotel bar session.
Right.
Yeah. And we could do something on identity and identification. I think it would be an interesting sort of conversation.
Yeah.
And what derives from that.
And speaking of that, listeners or watchers in this case, speaking of that, you can always go to our website at www.hotelbarpodcast.com and click on the interactive page. And we actually have a already set form for any suggestions that you have for topics in future episodes. So obviously, if you make suggestions now, there'll be topics that we do in season 3, but we're really looking forward to hearing from you about what you want to hear about.
There's always an open seat at our table at the bar.
100%.
As long as you buy us a drink.
Somebody's got to catch us when we fall.
Right, exactly. Someone's got to point us toward the elevators.
Somebody's got to drive us home.
But this has been fantastic. Yeah. Lee, great talking to you as always.
Good to see you, my man.
All right, good to be seen. Rick Lee, great talking to you as always.
Next best thing to sitting on the porch with you.
All right, I agree. And I will see you all at the next hotel bar session.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.